Hello and welcome to the Petey Performance Podcast. Another solo episode of the podcast for you guys today. It seems like ages since I have done a solo podcast, even though it isn't that long really at all. And it's another impromptu episode. As usual, I've come to this episode and I kind of know what I'm going to talk about. I've written it down on paper. But I don't know in what direction I'm going to go with it. I'm winging it essentially. And sometimes just verbalizing your thoughts and putting them out there into the world allows you to refine how you're thinking and puts together a little bit more of a systemized approach to how you're doing things. So, what I came on today to talk about is communication. And not only communication, but communication in teams, communication in coaching, communication as leaders, creating leaders, and leadership as well. All things that I talk about quite a lot, but all things that I think we know are very, very important as coaches and as players. Our use of language is really, really important. It's only when you coach kids, I think, generally, that you realize the impact that you can have on athletes and what they retain. They're really listening to you and hearing you. If you're a good communicator, they're hearing what you were saying and how you were saying it. And they will hopefully retain that information if you're a good coach and if they want to listen to you. If you're somebody that they admire or somebody that they trust or somebody that they believe has some of the answers to take their performance to the next level, then they're likely to listen to every word you say and how you say it. And it's only in the case of when you're coaching kids and they relay information back to you that maybe you said in passing a couple of weeks previously that you realize how much they are listening to what you're saying. And that happens with younger athletes as well. Like it's happened a couple of times over the last while when I've been coaching and younger athletes on the teams have said, but you're saying lean forward on this exercise. Why do you want us to lean a little bit more forward? You're telling us to be tall when we're doing the other runs. And then I'm outlining to them that what I'm looking for in acceleration and what I'm looking for in max speed are slightly different in terms of our orientation towards the floor. But the good thing about that is even though maybe I'm not being as clear as I possibly can in regards to why we are doing the things that we're doing and why I'm cueing the things that I'm cueing, they are listening and they're hearing what I'm saying. They're just maybe not understanding completely why that is the case. And I know that Brett Bartholomew and Nick Winkelman talk a lot about language as coaches, and Dan Paff talks about how coaching is an art and a science. And sure, I think we should know the science. As I've said previously, I think it's a prerequisite for being an effective coach and being able to problem solve is knowing the background, knowing the research, and having an idea what works. And then after that, making an educated judgment based on what you know or what you believe you know. And then after that, communicating that effectively to the athlete. But from my conversation with David Gray, it's clear that communication, I think, is an underutilized tool, to be honest, because in the past, when I was a very young coach, I would have thought a lot about my cues and what my cues were for each exercise and how I elicited change in how the person in front of me was moving, for sure. And then you get to a stage where you're comfortable with how you're getting people to achieve movement success or move in the way that you want them to move. And then you kind of go more down the rabbit hole. Okay, I can get them to move how I want them to move, but why am I getting them to do this? What is the best thing to implement in this scenario? What should I be trying to achieve in this scenario when they need a little bit of this or when they need to improve in this aspect? And that's when we go down the rabbit holes of exercise selection and programming and figuring out how to organize a training structure and organize and implement an effective schedule for the athletes. But you can be very good at that and not be a good coach, because at the end of the day, how we communicate is how we coach. So I've been probably moving more towards a stage where I'm trying to communicate more effectively with my athletes, with my staff as well, with people in my family, with friends, with everybody. And I think the key is always, well, there are a number of different keys. First, be clear and concise and think about what you're saying. But probably of primary importance is to listen to the other person and give them the opportunity and the space to speak their truth and speak what they believe. And then not only give them that space, but listen and hear what they are saying. It's what we want our athletes to do with what we're saying. But in order to achieve that trust between coach and athlete, we have to do as we say, and we need to practice what we preach, and we need to listen to them, because a lot of the time athletes just want to be understood. And once they feel understood, then they're going to be more likely to trust you. And you're going to get so much information from the other person as to what's going to be effective in a certain scenario. And from my conversations with Alan Murdoch in the mentorship with Speedworks, he often, when he's coaching, and I asked him this question, I said, in terms of your cues, do you always ask them what they're feeling first before you give them a cue? And he said, yeah, a lot of the time I will, because just because if someone's maximally sprinting and I want them, and I typically use the analogy to strike the floor like a match with one athlete, that doesn't mean it's going to work with another athlete, because as Jonas says, if I write an M on paper, I think it's an M, and it's an M for me, from your perspective, it could be a W. And from another perspective, it could be an uppercase E. Everybody interprets different information or the same information differently. So you need to find what works for your athlete. So in the case, and in this example, Alan was saying, okay, how did that feel for a good rep or a better rep than the previous rep? And the athlete said, I felt like I was going more forward in what I was doing. And Alan says, perfect. Next rep, I want you to feel more of that and feel like you're going more forward than you were in the previous one. And likewise, we were over and we had an athlete and we were teaching horizontal projection. Well, Alan was, I don't know why I said we, but we were present and Alan was coaching the athlete. And Alan was explaining what and why he was doing and what he was trying to do at the shin and what he was trying to do at the hip, what he was trying to see and what he was trying to achieve. And then one of the final pieces of information he gave to the athlete was, okay, see that gap up there? Just try and go out through that gap in the door for me, please. And the athlete had a go, and he initially didn't succeed to a fantastic level, and he knew that, and he said, yeah, no, that wasn't great. And he wanted to do it again, and he did it again, and he didn't succeed to what was the required level or what the level was that he expected of himself again. And then on one rep, the third rep, he absolutely exploded forward horizontally. Incredible power. And Alan just said, what were you thinking of there? And the athlete said, I was just thinking about going through the gap in the door. I stopped thinking about all of the intricacies of, say, my internal cues or my internal cues, and I just thought of the external cue of go through that gap in the door. And that just meant that the athlete was taken out of their head and they weren't thinking how I'm going to do it, but they just thought, okay, I'm going to really try and explode out through that, and whatever happens, happens to my body. Kind of self-organization in a way. And it's similar in a way to, obviously, a lot of you that are subscribers and listeners will know that I'm playing a lot of golf lately. And my driving was completely erratic for a long time. I was actually using the wood for quite some time. I wasn't using the driver at all. And I was always thinking, okay, where's my backswing going to? And then follow through as much as this in my follow through, and try keep my feet here and try keep my hips here, and then turn my hips aggressively, and all of these things which were internal cues. And then I was watching a video of the guys from Barstool Sports, Fixing Frankie, I think is the name of it, the series that they do. And he had like a golf coach or mindset coach out with him. And that mindset coach was speaking about picking a target, a precise target, very, very far away initially. And then after you've picked that target, say you're trying to hit it in the fairway, well, where in the fairway? Where, if you have a bunker, or if you have a piece of grass and specifically, or a tree, you're aiming like 10 yards back from that or whatever, which a lot of people will think. But then he's narrowing his focus towards that point. And then after that is done, he draws a line back from that point to about 10 yards in front of the ball. And I do this on my putting, so I don't know why I didn't think about doing it on my driving. And then he says, well, if you're trying to hit that point out there, which is a precise, narrow point, then the ball has to pass pretty much that point that's 10 yards in front of your body. So I want you to keep in your mind, you're trying to narrow your focus towards this one point out in the fairway, but know that if the ball goes over that point 5 yards in front of where you're facing, it will likely reach that target out there. And as a goal kicker, I used to do this like a lot. Like, so I don't know why I didn't think about bringing it over to golf. I was narrowing my focus to a single point, and Johnny Wilkinson talks about this in his book, and Dave Aldred in The Pressure Principle. I used to imagine a circle in the middle of the goals, and I'd try and kick it through that ring or that circle. Or I would stand my dad behind the goals and I'd try and kick it into his hands behind the goals. And then on a game day, I'd try to picture him either behind the goalpost and he's going to catch it in his hand, or I'd picture that ring and try and kick it through that ring. But I would know that if the ball passed the target, which was 5 meters in front of the ball and between the ball and the post, it was likely to go over. So I draw a line with my mind the whole way back. And I've been doing the same thing with my driving, and now my driving is better and more accurate than it ever has been. Just from no longer thinking about the internal goal or the intrinsic cue of where my swing is going, but thinking of the external cue. And that's the power of language and the power of focus and the power that we have as coaches. Some athletes will like the external cues, some will like the internal cues, but it's about figuring out what works for the athlete. And you only do that through collaboration and communication and speaking to the athlete. So I know it can be hard in a team setting, but you have to have individual conversations. And in your small group sessions or in your one-on-ones, you have to be asking so many questions and figuring out what the athlete is feeling and how they're achieving what they're achieving and what's going to work for them. But you also have to be prepared to throw out cues immediately if they don't work. So that's from a coach's perspective, communication with the athlete, coach to athlete. From an athlete perspective, athlete back to coach, I find from working in Gaelic games and the GAA, I don't think athletes are as honest always as they should be with the coaches and with each other in a team setting as well. Because from my conversations with Fergus Connolly and from other athletes as well, high-performing athletes, if you want to achieve success in anything, in any team endeavor, you have to have brutal honesty amongst the group, and you have to have an ability and a willingness to take on board constructive criticism. So you need to identify problems and come with solutions, and you have to be willing to take that on board. And I think as coaches, we need to be willing to take that on board as well. So I'm always asking my athletes, okay, how can we improve training? What are you enjoying about training? What are you not enjoying? Which one of these variations or exercise variations are you feeling the most, or which do you enjoy the most? Which of these do you find isn't working for you at all? So it's athlete led and player led, and then we're guiding it as coaches. But we can only do that if the athletes are honest with us as coaches. Now, there are cases where in every team, there are athletes that just want to identify problems. And it's okay for them to be that way. That's their personality. They're a little bit contrarian, probably. Like Phil Jackson says about Dennis Rodman, he's a backwards walking person in the Native American language. So he lets him walk backwards. And I think it's important that we don't absolutely get that out of the players that are that way, but we are lenient towards them and we're willing to allow them to be a certain way that they are, but we don't become married to all of their contradictions and their contrarian opinions all the time, but we should be listening to some of them. And it is useful to have someone there that's going to do that consistently, because you are constantly refining and thinking about your process. So in a way, they are going to be the most honest ones in the group, but you're not going to have to listen to them all the time, but it is still useful to listen to them some of the time. But the real challenge as a coach and in any group is drawing the honesty out of the players that maybe don't like to speak as much, that don't like to be in the limelight as much. And those players typically aren't going to be as comfortable talking in a group setting. So what I've used in the past effectively, and what lots of coaches use and teachers as well, is making the group into smaller groups when you're doing your team meetings, and then having them relay the information back to their person in the group, and then having one spokesperson for the group that will speak out all of the points. But I think it's important to change that spokesperson every time you go around the tables, because otherwise the same people will speak all the time and they'll put their own spin on things all the time, and we'll be getting the same feedback. Even though it's better than no feedback, I think we're trying to facilitate more leadership from all of the athletes in the group all of the time. And we only do that by making them feel comfortable in doing so. Likewise, if an athlete that doesn't normally speak does speak in the group setting, you have to use positive reinforcement. You have to use huge amounts of it. You need to reward them for doing so, because you want them to be likely to do it again. No matter if you agree or disagree, you will agree to a certain extent, but you need to highlight that absolutely, that's a great idea. How are you thinking? And get them to elaborate on it as well, because the more they speak in front of the group, typically, the more comfortable they're going to feel speaking in front of the group more often. And it kind of like, it flabbergasts me to an extent that, because I was probably the player or the athlete that didn't have any qualms about speaking in the group. I probably needed to shut up and listen a little bit more. And that's probably the natural coach in me, that I was comfortable in those settings. But other athletes aren't as comfortable. But it still stumps me a little bit that athletes will complain about certain things not being the way they want them to be, and other athletes on the team not doing what they believe is required to achieve success that they all want to achieve as a team, but being unwilling to say it to that athlete. Because if it's not put out in the open and it's not said to the person, and they're not held accountable, and the discussion isn't had, then it's not likely to change by itself. So regardless of the case that there may be a chance that there's an argument as a result of a mismatch in opinions, that short-term pain is worth the long-term gain of airing everything out in the open. So by putting it off and putting it off, all you're going to breed is more and more resentment, And we all know that in a team, you need to have togetherness if you're going to achieve anything. So resentment is not aligned with success as a team. It can't be present to a high extent. So if we want to get rid of that resentment, we all have to be honest and open with each other, and we have to be willing to listen to each other as well. And we have to be understanding and understand that each person that's bringing something to the table, they believe what they're saying is for the betterment of both themselves and the group. So we need to respect that, but we need to be able to understand their opinion, and hopefully by being understanding of their opinion, we will achieve an understanding from their perspective of our opinion. And usually, anyway, it's not one person being right or wrong, and both opinions are going to lie on each side of the spectrum, but the answer probably lies somewhere in the gray area in the middle. So we're going to be closer to that gray area and achieving the middle if both opinions are voiced. And this is why I believe in GAA and Gaelic games, we don't have enough meetings. Like in rugby, at least at a high level, you'll have a meeting every week, like before every session sometimes. And things will be aired out, and you'll give your 3 points for each session and 3 points for each game. And then out of that meeting, players are given an opportunity to speak their minds and speak what they believe is their truth and speak about what they believe needs to change. And then as a result, we're more closely aligned to the overall and the overarching goal. And I believe a lot of the time, from both a coaching perspective and from an athlete perspective, in Gaelic games, at least from my experience, we leave a lot of things to chance, in that we're like, okay, well, I'm just going to show up at training. I'm going to go into the training room, have a bit of a laugh with the lads or the ladies. I'm going to do the training, do my gym or whatever, and then I'm going to go home. Whereas like a 5 to 10 minute meeting with a coach or other players, maybe of a leadership group or something like that, is going to be so beneficial for steering the course and making sure we're aligned to what we set out at the start of the year, and making sure that we're continually improving and constantly assessing and refining our process. And the same thing goes for coaches as well. And it can be sometimes difficult to find the time to do that, but it doesn't have to be every week. Even for a reflection and a preview for like a 2-month or 4, 6, 8 week block is going to be really effective, I think. And I know sometimes those meetings can drag on, so it is important to try and keep them to a minimum if possible, and be as clear and concise as you can and have your points when you're going in, but then let the players lead the meeting and deliver the meeting and let them voice their opinions, but know as a coach what questions you're going to ask and what points you're going to present, if you are going to present any points as well at the start. So I think that's something that is underutilized as coaches. I am interrupting this podcast to let you guys know that we are currently full at Petey Performance in the Petey Performance Premium Pack for online coaching, but I will be only taking on 2 athletes for in-person coaching for the rest of May. So that's all I have available at the moment. As well as that, I'll be only taking on 2 more athletes into the Petey Performance Premium Pack in the online version for June. So if you want to be one of those 2 athletes, then make sure you get in touch as soon as possible. Drop me a message on social media. Just drop me a message with the word coach, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as possible. It would be great to take your performance to the next level. As you know, I'm specializing in strength and conditioning and the development of game speed in team sports, particularly GAA. So if you're struggling with your speed, your agility, or your resilience and your robustness, and you're struggling with niggly injuries, you're coming into championship season soon, and you want to do the prep now to be the best athlete that you've ever been come championship, then drop me a DM with the word coach. And now, back to the podcast. And then planning out what is going to be worked on and a monthly schedule and a weekly schedule, I think, is not used enough in GAA as well. Because I find, and I've spoken about it before, we're extremely reactive to results. So, okay, puck outs went bad on Saturday or Sunday. So next week, Tuesday, Thursday, we're going to just work on puck outs for about 20 minutes, half an hour. Okay, so there's an opportunity cost to doing that, because are we going to get the same out of doing 20 minutes to half an hour on puck outs as we would of doing it one night, 20 minutes, and then doing maybe another night, 20 minutes or 10 minutes working on transitions, or in the same night, moving from puck outs into transition from defense to attack or whatever, or puck outs into attack afterwards? And if we work on and we split the games down, as we often do, we'll have attack, defense, transition to defense, and transition to attack. And then off the back of that as well, we might have kickouts or puckouts in Gaelic games. And we'll probably have our own kickouts and opposition kickouts or puckouts. So there's roughly 6 parts of the game that you have to fit in frequently throughout the monthly schedule and throughout the season if you're going to continually improve in each regard as a team. Otherwise, you're just throwing shit at the wall and hoping some of it sticks, essentially. And off the back of those, if we pick maybe maximum 2 of those as the emphasis for each session, then we're not leaving as much to chance, because you might have, say, I don't know, 8 to 10 sessions in a month. If you pick 2 per session, say you did attack and transition attack one night, the following night you did defense and opposition kickouts, and then the following night you did transition to defense and our own kickouts. If you did that consistently, you would hit each of those twice within the month, and you'd know when you're going to do it, and you'd be planned, and you'd have your drills and your skills and your emphasis, and you'd know exactly what you're going to be doing on each day in question, and you'd know that you're not forgetting anything. Every base is covered, and you're not going to have any dissent from the forwards and the backs that they're not doing enough of this in training, because everything's being catered for. And if the forwards feel like they need to do more shooting in a closed scenario, then they know that they can get out and do that themselves pre-training. Or if the defenders feel like they need to get a little bit more fitness work done or more one-on-one work done, trying to defend the tackle or whatever, then they can get that in an individual setting. And a useful way, I know I've said it before, within that structure is you'll still have time within that structure to work on skills for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes per session as well. So you could break down your skills. Like I had this conversation yesterday with our hurling coach, like you have striking, hand passing, fielding or catching, and first touch, I think. And shooting, sorry, so 5. So, and sorry, then number 6 would be your blocking or your hooking, he said. So there's your 6 of those, and then you have your 6 parts of the game. So you could pair, say, striking and shooting with an attack-focused day, and you could work on those skills on that day. And in that way, the whole session is aligned towards the same goal. And the next day, if you're working on transition, say, as a good example, then you might work on hand passing and catching or something like that. And you might be hearing this as a coach and saying, oh, well, it's much of a muchness, but it's what you're coaching and the emphasis of your coaching. So if you're coaching the catching, then you shouldn't be getting as fixated on how the strike is going. You should be mainly focused on, are we catching balls? The lost art, the lost skill of hurling, I know. And same thing with the hand pass. We should be stressing the hand pass and trying to get it as good as we possibly can and be as successful as we possibly can. But we can't get caught up if there are mistakes, because there should be mistakes. We want that 66% success rate, that 70-30 success rate. So we don't want to be succeeding 100% of the time, 90% of the time, because that means the players aren't being challenged. But equally, we don't want to only be successful 50% of the time, because that means we're probably stressing them too much and they're not getting much out of it. And as well as that, your buy-in isn't going to be great and they're probably not going to be very, very confident after it. So, like, I think these are things to follow on that coaches and athletic development coaches and the whole coaching team, selectors, should be talking about what needs to be worked on, because we all know in any team, there's probably one of those tactical periodization sections or parts of the game, phases of the game, attack, defense, transition, attack, that you're pretty confident in. So you probably don't need to work on it as much as the others. And there's probably one that really, really needs more work. So if you use this framework, you're going to have more time to allocate to the ones that need to be worked on, but you're still going to get enough of a focus on the ones that you're already strong in, that they're not going to reduce in your effectiveness in execution. And the only way that this gets done is if you have bi-weekly or monthly meetings as a coaching staff. I would say monthly is probably the most effective from my perspective. I have gone bi-weekly previously. I think it's a little bit too much, but monthly to 6 weekly, like, I think that's not a huge amount to do. And it probably is only going to take you 15 to 20 minutes to go through all this and assess what's been going well, and then decide what's not been going well, and then decide the training plan off of that. And then you already know from my podcast on in-season training for GAA how I color code the sessions, and if things need to be altered on a monthly basis, or if there needs to be changes in schedule due to matches being rescheduled because of them being rained off or cancelled or postponed or whatever, that can be done in this session as well. But if the coaches are doing that monthly meeting, I believe, and I don't see it across the board in GAA, but it probably is pretty much across the board in rugby, I believe that the leadership group, if there is one, should be sitting down at least monthly as well. And that's a playing group. And that's from James Kerr's book Legacy. And that was where I first encountered it. And it was the leaders in the team, as elected by the team. They are the go-betweens between management and the team, even though everybody can speak to management, but they're the ones that if players aren't comfortable speaking to management, they speak to those players. And they're also the players that enforce the non-negotiables or hold players mainly accountable and lead to more player-led development of the team. It gives them more responsibilities. They have more responsibilities as a leadership group. And they also have more opportunities as well to speak about training and speak about the needs of the players and whatnot, and to make sure everything's going on track. And I think that should be done. And I originally, when I was younger and read that book, I thought that the leadership group had to be the senior players in the group. But then when I went down to New Zealand to play rugby, there was an interesting idea in the club I was in that they put 1 to 2 of the younger players in that leadership group to give them more responsibility and give more of a voice, to the younger players in the team. And that's something that I've practiced and that I've tried to implement since then, because there will be young leaders in the team and there will be senior players in the team. And just because of seniority, geez, that's a hard word. Just because of whatever that word is that I can't say, that doesn't mean that you have more of a valid or more validity to your opinion than the younger players. And we should be giving voice to the younger players as well. We want them to become leaders and we want them to give voice. And that's something that I've been trying to facilitate with one of my teams as well, in that there is quite an age gap, and it seemed that the senior players are the ones that run the dressing room, very old school approach. But then there's a bit of a mismatch between how they think about training and how they think about communication and the team environment, and the younger players and how they think about it. And I see it a lot, and I've spoken about it with one of my players on my other teams, in that there is a big generational shift between, say, your Gen Zers and then your millennials and older. The Gen Zers are just so positive and like they're just so susceptible to negativity. They don't want to hear the negativity. They want to hear the positivity, but they're so responsive to positive reinforcement. They love it. Like they just crave it, but they're also so confident and they're so able to say and speak about their goals and speak things into existence and say, I'm going to do that and I believe I can. Whereas millennials and older, there's more of a negativity bias and they're looking for the negative and they're looking for the criticism and they're telling the coaches, I need you to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Whereas the younger group, and these are generalizations, by the way, as you can tell, it's not across the board, but the younger group are generally, they're looking for, tell me what I'm doing right and I'll do more of it. And obviously, it's appropriate to do both with both groups. But from my perspective and my experience, that seems to be the case. So you cannot use this authoritative coaching approach where you're telling players what to do and telling them what they're doing wrong and focusing on the negativity with these younger players because it won't work. And that comes back to the importance of how we're communicating and how we're communicating and the language that we're using and what we're focusing on. Because I had a conversation last week with an elite athlete, very elite athlete, and we were talking about what we're focusing on as coaches and how to elicit change, positive change, and a more positive mindset and less fear and more abundance and opportunity amongst the group. And it comes back to how you're communicating. If somebody goes through on goal, as an example, are you as a coach saying to them, okay, don't miss it? Because they're not going to hear the negative. They're just going to hear miss. And then they're going to be more likely to miss. And as a former goal kicker, I know this. And it's the same thing in golf. It's like before you line up the team shot, you're saying, don't hit in the water, don't hit in the water, straight into the water. So rather than doing that, I asked this athlete who was a forward, what are they thinking about? And she said, I'm thinking about putting it in the right hand bottom corner. So she's narrowing her focus to come back to what I said earlier. But she's not even thinking about scoring. She's not even thinking about missing. She's not even thinking about the outcome at all. She's thinking about the process. I'm putting it in the right hand bottom corner. And that gives her more leeway, similarly to anything, to make a slight mistake. If it doesn't go in the right hand corner, it's still going to be hopefully far enough away from the goalkeeper that it'll still go into the goal. And likewise, it's like, as a golfer, if you're pitching onto the gym, and I'll stop bringing up golf analogies into it now, but aiming for the middle of the green, because we know that you might be likely to go left, you might be likely to go right. If you're chipping or pitching and you have an open club face and you're not very good like me. Actually, I'm not going to say that anymore. Not good yet, like me. You're going to give yourself more leeway that you'll still be on the green and you'll still be within a chance of a putt. But you're narrowing your focus and you're not thinking about, okay, striking it a certain way. You're not thinking about missing. You're not thinking about the fear of what's going to happen if this or whatever. You're thinking, okay, I'm aiming for this specific point. If it goes here, I know that I'm going to be likely to score, which is what I want to do. And in that way, we can become very driven by data nowadays, and like this is our conversion rate, or this is what we're focusing on, and this is how often we're succeeding, and this is how many missed shots you had, and this is how many shots you converted. But if we're consistently focusing on the negative and our percentage and all that kind of stuff, and speaking from a goal kicking perspective, I know this for sure, we're going to be less likely to have a high percentage because we are living out of fear and we're executing out of fear and we're constantly thinking about that percentage in our head. Whereas you should be thinking and taking each kick and each shot in football or each pass as its own entity, its own specific endeavor. And you're trying to achieve outcome success in that one. But if you don't, you got to let it slide, forget about it, and on to the next one. And I remember kicking balls and kicking balls and kicking balls and focusing on how many have I got today. And it didn't work for me because I was constantly focused on, oh shit, I'm after missing 3 already. If I want to beat my percentage from the last day, I can only miss 2 more. So I'm already talking about what I've missed and what I can't do rather than thinking, okay, I have 7 shots left, but I'm taking the first one now. So I'm just going to focus on this ball and I'm going to try and knock it through that ring and through the goalpost and into my dad's arms or whatever I'm picturing in my head. So as coaches, we need to be thinking about how our athletes are hearing what we're saying. And if our athletes and you as an athlete, you're not getting what you want from your coach, you need to be willing to say it to them. And you need to be saying to them, look, that's not working for me. When you say this to me, I don't want to focus on that. I want to focus on this. And the coach, if they're a good coach, will say that's perfectly fine. They'll retain that information and they'll keep relaying that to you all the time and all the time and all the time until it becomes non-conscious, you believe it, and you're executing to a high level. So loads in that, more ramblings, I'm sure, than anything, but a lot about communication, a little bit about mindset, a little bit about how we're communicating with different athletes of different generations, how we structure our leadership, how we communicate with each other as coaches. And it is important, just as a final thought, it is important that in a coaching group, we have multiple coaches with different frameworks, different approaches, and different systems as well, because that is how we continue to improve and challenge each other. If everybody has the exact same approach and they played in the exact same team growing up and they were coached the exact same way, then it'll become a vacuum and there's no contradictory thought whatsoever. Similarly to what I was saying about the contrarian player that will continually question why you're doing things. It's more of a positive than it is a negative. And it's the same thing in a coaching team. You don't need to agree on everything all of the time, and it's a good thing if you don't. So when you're putting together your coaching team, you should be thinking, and I think the same way from a staff perspective, okay, I want somebody that aligns with what we're doing values-wise, but if they disagree with our system slightly and have their own framework for doing things, and I'm more new school and they're more old school, and they have strengths in communication and I have strengths in data analysis and structure and whatnot, the team is going to benefit overall more than if you just have prototypes and clones of each other. Similarly to on the field, you don't want all of the players to be clones of each other. Like my conversation with Darren McGurn, we want some guys that play with freedom and we might give them a free role and they have great skill and they're really creative. We want other guys that maybe aren't that way inclined, but are really systemized and really good at executing their specific role. And it takes multiple different people and types of people and different personalities and different skill sets to make an effective team. So I'm going to finish it there because I think I've said enough there. I hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did enjoy it, please remember to like it, share it, and send it.